Thanks for coming. I'm Simon Davies. What we're going to talk about today is a new project by Code Red that we've been working on for the past year. I'm joined by Sander, by Bill, by Annie. Where's Annie? They're all from Code Red. And we're very excited by this because when we started Code Red a long time ago, we did lots of consultation meetings across the world, but we asked the question, what is it that civil society and human rights needs to move forward, to have a bigger voice and a greater influence? And so it was taking the slow road to try and find out what we could do best, sort of as a group of fairly seasoned pioneers in so many areas, whistleblowing and policy and law, media, politics. And one of the very clear messages that came through was that we need data, information to be more readily available, for it to be to cut across disciplines and to be freely accessible to all. And it kind of sounded like a really obvious thing to say, like, if you're going to drag something along, you use wheels. I mean, obviously we need data, but the problem is that everybody was reporting that the search engines were failing, and increasingly people had to build their own silos and their own portals. Those became effectively isolated, and it was almost impossible to get information unless you actually knew the information was there to begin with. Very, very difficult to actually find out its whereabouts. So we started working. Originally we called it a clearinghouse, and then we realised that's just going to be another big silo. So we started talking to the librarians and the archivists, and we tried to figure out in history kind of how we move forward, and what did they do in the past. It used to be that libraries classified all their books by size and colour. So you go into, and a librarian basically was the smart person. You go to the smart person who would say, and you say, I'm looking for a book from, by Kant on this subject, and I think it was a blue book that was quite big. And she would go, yes, or he back then, of course, would say, oh yes, if you go to that shelf over there, there's a blue book by Kant. And that's the way it was all done. And nobody could conceive that actually if you created a numbering system, you might actually be able to do this a lot more efficiently. And this actually took like 30 years for people to get their head wrapped around. In the same way, we use search engines these days, and people can't conceive that there's another way that you can organize data, because Google told us for 13 years, we're going to be the organizers of the world's information. But they haven't. It's a commercial-based, biased engine. Now, what I want to do is very quickly, before handing to Sander, is just run you through why and how we came up with this rather bizarre and quite intuitive, actually it is, I think, intuitive system. Okay, as I say, this is where we are at the moment. We have a real problem in that these increasing masses of information are starting to become ghettoized. If there's such a word as ghettoized, that's what they're becoming. They're forming clumps, data clumps, specific to particular languages, in particular disciplines, locked into silos, with portals which you have to know the existence of before you can find them. And if that's not the case, they're locked behind paywalls, or you have to register for the data. So it's a real problem. So it leads to these two core problems. The first, as you see, you do a conventional search, you're going to miss 98% of the data. You're just not going to see it, either because it's invisible or it's simply obscured in the white noise of search. And the second here, and this is a really important one, is you're really only going to be searching in your own language, which might seem obvious because you're not going to perhaps understand a document in Spanish and whether it's relevant to what you want. Okay, so far so good. But these are the problems we're facing. In between technical failure, search bias, and so on, it's really difficult to get information that you want. So you're putting information out there, And the lie that we were always told was it's just like a library, it will be there permanently, and you know, everybody can find it. And of course they don't, and they can't. And within 2 years, the chances are the information that you create, whether it's a patent, whether it's an essay or a campaign document, that's going to vanish. It will just disappear from view. So what we say here, and there's actually a good anecdote here. So you go to a specific portal like Huradox down here right now. Okay, the string online privacy campaign surveillance Europe, you would have thought would be pretty precise on a human rights website. No, 5,000 results. And they're not even graded according to the significance and the relevance of the document. Now, if that's what Huradox is producing for that string, imagine the complexity of trying to use a search engine to find a document buried in that string. This is our problem. So I'm going to get, on a practical level, this is what, I like this quite a bit. This is the greatest library in the world, the British Library. It's not the Library of Congress, just for Americans. The British Library has 170 million volumes. And there it is. I'm going to stick to the same, so shoot me, I'm going to stick to the same image here so it'll start getting blurry. If an ordinary searcher uses Google, all right, you've got to imagine this wraps right the way around you and there's all the anti-rooms going right back, but this is roughly what's available. So like that, the string that we just talked about then about online privacy campaigns Europe, surveillance, that's what you'll get. Now that's absolutely worthless. Smart people, of which there are, you know, you're all smart people. I can see it in your face, even at 8:45 in the morning. You say, I know how to dig this problem. I can do a better search because I'm a talented researcher. And yes, you can. There you are. You're going to narrow it to this. You're still going to get 2,000 relevant search results. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter. Even the most talented university researchers I've spoken to have almost given up at this point. Because unless you know that Fred Smith wrote this book on this year, at this year, in this location, you're still not going to find what you want. So what we're looking for and what we're hoping to deliver through this Freedom Index is that. Blurry, I know, but that's what we're trying to get to. Just those couple of shelves. We want to produce 5, 10, 20 results that precisely match what a searcher is looking for in any language. This is really important. This language question is critically important because we are ghettoizing languages at the moment. So here's what we did. After about 6 months, we went, you know what, the answer is in history. We go back into the old Dewey Decimal System from the 1800s, but we recreate it for modern times. So this is a 12-digit string. As you see, what we can do is we can get human rights and we can get it into 10 million to 1 billion subcategories. There's no way anybody, even in this room, is going to be able to exhaust that potential. And I'll explain, so I'll give you a bit of an example. This will be explained more by Sandra in a moment, but this is the actual number logic. In some respects, it's similar to the Dewey Decimal System. That's the core of all libraries in the world. But at the beginning, this is where it gets cool. We have what's called a control field. Because one thing, as we were talking to different organizations, it became clear that there's a vast amount of data which is either in progress, in preparation, or it's secret, or it's restricted. So imagine if you had the equivalent of the librarian's Dewey Decimal System, but you could flick this control field. So if you turned it from 1, which is public, to 2, which is restricted, the system recognizes that and insists on the restrictions that the publisher has applied. If it's secret, those levels of restrictions will be increased. If you need to revoke the data, and we do have now a right to be forgotten, you could flick it to 4, and the data is revoked, at least from the central index. Now, these numbers, following that, you've got 7 content fields. That gives you 100 million subcategories, followed by the medium, whether it's a book, whether it's an audio, visual, whatever, and your 3 geography and language fields. Now, You're a publisher. You've just spent 6 months doing a campaign. 6 months. And the Ford Foundation has exhausted, $300,000 on this campaign. And as we did, because we talked to the Ford Foundation, they said our big problem is this stuff just then disappears. And even if it doesn't disappear, nobody can find it. You don't know that in Guatemala they just did the most amazing campaign on women's rights. You'll never find that out unless you happen to be a subscriber to the right journals. Right? And most people who aren't academic researchers aren't doing that. So the Guatemalan NGO assigns this number, which it uses this very helpful app to do. And if you're searching, you use the same procedure, and every document in the world that is tagged with that relevant number to women's rights campaigns that resulted in legal action against government, which government then appealed to, that sparked a referendum, let's say. We're still only up to 6 content digits, but you can now find any country in the world, any organization that's ever done that. So it's probably the biggest boost to research since Google. And that says something. So this is how it works. These are content fields. The second to the 8th category, as you see, it goes up to the 10 million subdivisions. This is incredibly difficult. I'll actually let you deal with some of this stuff, Sandra. Essentially what happens here is that you, as the publisher, have to generate this number. Now we're saying it's going to take around about 3 minutes for every piece of data, but you can have multiple numbers. This is where the Dewey Decimal System fails. You assign one number to a single piece of work. This, if that Guatemalan women's rights groups against violence against women also just happen to have integrity of the person, the right of association, other human rights at the core of the campaign, the app can also generate numbers for those fields. So anybody searching for those divisions will still come up with the same document and the same set of documents. This is how the number actually looks in schematic form. As you see, the major subdivisions here, and again, Sandra will deal with this in a moment, those are kind of your core, like, is it a fundamental freedom, is it a labor right, is it an economic right, and so on. And you just fan out from there, and it's scary. You can imagine how scary the job is of filling in all of the trees that emerge after the second field here. And this is essentially, and this is where I'll hand to you, Sandra. This is how this works. So you as the publisher, and this could also be the searcher, by the way. Let's say we're just looking at it from the publishing perspective for the moment. You're a PhD candidate. You're working on some arcane subject matter. You're in your second year, so now you're really reaching to try and get some support for your question. You can either publish what you've got straight to the internet so anyone can see it, or you can use this app through the API, generate the index number, and it goes into if you like, it's a sort of a very sort of clever archive linked to a Wayback Machine. But what that means is that you can publish just the abstract of what you're researching on, and other people who are searching for that exact question anywhere in the world will see it, and you're not giving anything away. You're just saying, here's the abstract. And by the way, here's my contact details. You can actually develop the permissions you want, you can develop the trust network that you want with material that is in transit, it's in progress. And this could be anything from legislation through to research work to campaign work. You're basically using this central index for that purpose. Or you can publish directly to the internet. It doesn't really matter. It depends kind of what the level of integrity of the information is, the level of flexibility that you want, and the level of control. Now, before handing over, I'll just say that we've now run through this idea with probably 150 organizations. And the first so there's two questions. The first is, well, if this is so clever, why hasn't it been thought of before? Well, it has been. It's just that everybody these days in an age of tech goes, well, this is really clunky in the 19th century, isn't it? You mean I've actually got to generate a number? But when we did the work on it, we're figuring, well, okay, you generate the number, and that does take you a few minutes and maybe a couple of hours if you want to generate multiple numbers. But do you know how much time we waste trying to navigate the current system and promote our work? We spend days, weeks, constantly cutting and pasting URLs and distributing them and explaining to people why this is important. This actually saves bucket loads of time for everybody and is, infinitely sharper in focus. And the second thing that was raised is, well, why is it just for human rights? Well, as if that's not a big enough challenge already. But what we've done, this isn't in the app, is going back to here we go. Going back to this, there's actually two reserve fields here. So let's say that the field of medicine decides, you know what, this is actually really cool, and these guys have done all the hard work. They've actually made this thing possible in the internet age. So we want a medical field. So this suddenly becomes, the human rights becomes 0.1, medicine becomes 0.2. You've got the exact replication of all of this logic, but it now will apply to medicine. And if you want to switch data between the fields, you can. So a medical entry that also has a human rights implication still can use the same index number. It's just that it'll be an 0.2 with medicine instead of 0.1, but it still feeds from one discipline to the other. Now that's a long way off. It took the Dewey Decimal System 140 years before it found its feet. I'm not pretending. I'm not seeing, the bar councils rushing to say we've got to have a legal system. But let's get this up and running first. Let's get it working. The logic is kind of there. I think we've tested it with all of these meetings and consultations. What we're now looking for is how to move forward. And on that, I'll hand to you, Sander, and you can actually show the fun stuff.
Let me just get our... I got a microphone. Let me get that over there. Right. So our app that we currently have is basically consists of two parts. We have an API that can be used by other parties as well. Like if you have your own silo, you can hook into the API and use our indexing system to generate the index and also search through the index and get the precise results that you want. But to sort of demonstrate the proof of concept of this, I've also developed a simple front end for this, so that you can get a bit of a basic idea of how this works. So let's add a publication. The internet is a bit slow here though. But anyway, let's say that you're publishing a document, and so you have a little bit of metadata here, some title of, it could be anything really, of the content, it could be a web page or article, something that you publish. So, publication date, a summary, can be anything really. The URL is optional, but if you have a web resource, it's logical to have a URL there. So this is a French keyboard. Where's the dot? There. Ah yes, something like that. And now comes the cool part, the generating of the index number. So this is a control field that Simon was talking about. So for now it's public. Let's assume that it's public, and let's assume that this is some article about fundamental freedoms. Let's say, which it could be anything that you want really. But let's say that it is privacy. Maybe it's communication surveillance, and these are structured in trees. So basically, as soon as I pick another major division, for instance. I could have, a secondary division that's, under that, and that has its own subdivision, and that has its own specific focus. And you notice that here there isn't anything yet, but you can add something specific here. some specific focus. Pinpoint focus, let's say that it's a web resource. It could be a hard copy, a video, audio, and you can add media to this as well, like the article or something like that. And then location and language as well. So let's say that this is English. Let's add it to the index. So there we go. And it has generated an index number for us. So let's copy that. And the cool thing is that you can search for that. So there it is. And you can basically substitute a 0 for any field that you want. So I have to press shift here. Okay, 0. Which basically 0 in a field means that I don't care what the value of this thing is. So if you put 0 in the language field, for instance, it will return a very specific focus in human rights in various languages, in various regions. So that's how you cross the language barrier that we're currently dealing with. But that's, and there are obviously multiple things here as well, as an example of how this works. So you have the index number, the title, a little summary that tells you like what am I dealing with here, and then in the second phase of this thing, you can actually contact the publisher, or if it's a web resource, you can just go to the link. But if it's something else, and you need to contact the publisher and say, I want this specific thing. And that's how you know that it exists, because currently you don't know that a resource exists if you're not searching for specific, if you don't know the keywords that you need to use, for instance in Google, then it's hard to find the information that you want. You will be overwhelmed by the results. So and the aim for this is that you have, let's say 10 or 20, but a very small number of very specific documents that deal with that very specific focus in human rights in our case, but it could be also expanded to other fields like medicine or stuff like that. So so that's basically how our thing now works, our proof of concept, and we've built this in basically in two parts. The API structure exists so that if you are a publisher and you own a silo, a search silo in human rights, then you can hook into this and you can add index numbers to your own publications. You can search with the index numbers through our index, and it will return all of the very specific results in a very focused results. So that's basically how it works now. So that was my tech demo. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah. So as you see from this, it's kind of, we're trying to get to a point now where we can get people to play with the fields. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's no easy task, because even if you get up to the third content field, that's 1,000 entries that you've got to make for content. You go up to the fourth and it's 10,000. So that's you need to crowdsource, you need to have crowd input. And the second, so we've now reached essentially the end of the concept phase, the first phase. As we move now into phase 2, we've got to work out how we build trust and integrity into the building of this system. We can't afford to do what Dewey did. Dewey did spend 140 years, well, not him personally, but his ancestors, spent 140 years building this through a professional network of librarians, thousands and thousands of librarians. We can't do that. We don't have the time for this. We have to get this show on the road fairly soon. So we need to crowdsource it somehow. So trust is going to be absolutely integral to this. And in the second phase, of course, this is if you like, it's the fun phase, because all the questions that people have, like how do you build security into this system? How do you build permissions? How do you have secure revocation? How do you actually answer these really specific questions about the functioning of the system? Well, this is where we're now looking for development partners, and we've been talking to a number of organisations about this, where development partner effectively becomes, we take their data, well, we don't take it, you know what I mean, we borrow it, and we see how this system fits with their data. So we were talking yesterday to the Fundamental Rights Agency, for example, and we've been speaking to the European Commission, to Amnesty. So Amnesty International says, in Germany, says, we're trying to get our own search system functioning, but the problem is it's only available in German. But you want to know, for example, I happen to know, for example, in Denmark, Amnesty Denmark did an amazing publication on surveillance, but it's all in Danish. And you will never know about it, not even using Amnesty's search portal. You will never find it. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to crack the translation problem, right? We can't offer the world sort of super translation facilities. We can use Google, Translate as a back end somewhere to the system, right? But in reality, what we're trying to say is, even if you could search in other languages to find out the exact stuff you're looking for, the job of manually translating on the hope that some of those documents might just happen to have some content that you want, that is onerous and nobody does it. Nobody can afford to do that. They just don't have the time. All we can say is, here is an Amnesty Denmark publication exactly matches the publications you're looking for, and it's down to you to figure out, either by contacting Amnesty and saying, do you have an English version, or manually using search translation. So we can't solve that problem, but maybe in 10 years, 5 years, it will be easier. We can certainly, I'm sure we can, Santa, can't we? We can link to Google Translate to give people a sidebar translation.
We could, I think, yeah.
Yeah, of say abstracts. Yeah. But this is the cool stuff in stage 2. So now we're looking for development partners who can work with us. And of course, by the time we get to stage 3, that's when we're talking about the Wayback Machine. We're talking about this, integrating this fully into the information architecture of the world. Stage 2, as I say, is the fun bit where we're trying to sort out the technology. So we have spoken to some techies who have said, well, this system's completely useless because you haven't answered this question. Well, we don't intend to yet. We're not superheroes. We just want to get the logic sorted, get this down so that we have the road laid out. Once we've got the road laid out, the vehicles that we put on it and the bridges across it, those are the fun things that we're going to be working on. So that's it. It's been an interesting year.
Well, just for clarification, so I understand it, the index number is there to help us find publications in other languages.
Yes.
For instance,
and that's brilliant, because we're all going with English, I'm from Denmark. I write everything in English because nobody reads Danish.
Yeah.
But, so that's really smart. But if I then tag something into your machine, shouldn't I write a recipe in English? Wouldn't that be a better idea? Because if somebody found my publication in Danish, they would have no idea what it is about. They only know the number that it's...
They do know that it is very precisely focused on what they're looking for. So they know that your article, for instance, in Danish, is exactly what they are looking for. And they could...
The tagging, right?
Yeah, because of the number, and they could then, for instance, ask you for the article or have it translated or something like that.
You can certainly write the abstracts.
Of course.
Or we can also translate it through Google or Babyfish, if it still exists, as a sidebar, as I say, so that people could actually read and go,
That would be
Well, the site is already multilingual. I've made a Dutch version as well. I'm native Dutch, so that the multilingual support is already there, and we can detect what language the browser likes, and then we can use that and translate automatically, for instance.
Yeah, because the scripts are really hard. Language scripts are really.
You had a question?
Sorry, no.
Yeah.
Well, I really think, like you said, it's a brilliant development. Thank you for the presentation, how this works. My question is a bit related to what you said in your answer. You keep reiterating that it's a very precise way to find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because of the indexing, you can have like a very precise number, which allows you to find exactly what you're looking for in the same words. I was wondering whether that doesn't make it vulnerable to the interpretation of the publisher, because, for instance, I'm doing a research on lobbying in the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm doing that from a governance perspective, whereas someone else might have done that from a fundamental rights perspective. So whereas someone who might want to read my research could label it as a fundamental rights study, I see it as a governance study.
Well, you can add this is
multiple.
Yeah, you can add multiple index numbers to the same publication. Currently, in our proof of concept, that doesn't work yet, but that is our intention of supporting very soon. But you can add multiple numbers in different fields. For instance, if you say it's fundamental rights, privacy, maybe bodily privacy, and some other stuff, invasion of the home or something, or torture, then you can add multiple index numbers to that same document, and that will be picked up by people looking for it.
And in the same way, using because remember you've got the open web, where you can't really affect what people have published. What you can do is use the central index if you're authenticated in some way to use the central index. And it might be that the relevance of your document, your research, changes over time. And in fact, in 3 years, enough people might say, look, we need to add another index number, because actually the focus of this has suddenly become relevant because lobbying has moved more to criminal law than it currently does. So now we've introduced all sorts of crimes for unlawful, unregistered lobbying. So you find that the lobbying shifts across to more of a legal basis than a political basis. You might not sort of see that now, but in 3 years, that might be the way it goes. So as the relevance changes, we can add index numbers. You don't necessarily have to see them. I mean, they can be buried in metadata. But it means that anybody searching for any of those aspects will still hit your document. So yeah, that I think is kind of one of the big selling features.
You had a question?
My question is a bit related to indeed who is behind the indexing. Who decides basically the sectors and the subsectors? Because you can only have nine for each of the codes.
It's crowdsourced. So if you are missing something from, let's say you have, and it depends on. But if you're missing something in the, for instance, let's say you have a pinpoint focus and there's a list, and you say, okay, this doesn't apply to my document. You can, add a custom entry, and it will be stored for future use.
Go to 9, so
well, it depends on the field as well.
It's filled. If I think that the 9 that are there are not the ones that would cover me, then I wanted to have a 10th, and you can't do that.
Only for
you're up to, remember, you've got 10 million content categories.
Yeah, but the problem is, in my view, if you start doing such things, that it is very, very dependent on the particular author, on where you put your emphasis and which kind of choices you make over this whole tree. If the tree is predefined, then you just choose. But if you think it's not the right predefined tree, then you want to change it. If the numbers are all used at the right level, or at some of the levels that you want, then you're stuck.
Or you add another number.
Or you can
add another number at the end.
Vice versa,
Yeah.
the problem occurs, of course, when you are searching. When you are creating your code that you are searching for.
Well, this is okay. So this is stage 2 work. We crowdsource, and I agree that the crowdsourcing may not go quite in the direction you want. You might actually run out of, let's say, a pinpoint. I doubt this is going to happen, frankly, because I don't think anyone's really going to get to the pinpoint focus, because by that point you're talking about such fine granularity of focus that it would almost become laughable.
Yeah, but wouldn't you get into the same kind of problems like Wikipedia, or in the beginning when the text was there and somebody changed it and another one changed it again and all these kind of things? So you need a moderation in order to make sure
Yeah, and
this
is again stage 2. You're dead right, and this is again stage 2 work, because this is the whole trust question. But I would say one thing: we're not letting the lambs into the lion cage here. the first 3 of these fields we control. And by we, I'm talking about trusted group. You do not let the first 3 fields go. That's your motorway network. After that, it's a lot easier to crowdsource because and there are some issues here in terms of, well, you might go down this particular branch and find you don't have a predefined word that you want and you don't have space for your own. But that's what we've got to work out in stage 2, and I don't think it's a major issue. I think it's how do we do this? What is the logic behind the crowdsourcing of the stage 4 fields and onward? You're right, at Wikipedia, in fact, I was going to actually contact Jimmy Wales over this, because I think there's a lot that he learned and Wiki learned about how you manage lots of input to a major system. And as I say, we don't have that answer yet because nobody's tried this in 140 years. So how do we, we've got no one to turn to, so we're going to have to go to people who've, done, Wikipedia, Creative Commons, who've done major systems. But I think I totally take on board what you're saying. I think throwing this open to crowdsource it's the only way you can proceed with a major system. But it's true that you might end up going down dead ends sometimes. There's not much we can do. We can't. I don't think we can create an infallible system. If you're dealing with data, you're screwed. You're going to hit a dead end sometimes, and you're just going to go back and try a different branch. If we're clever enough, though, with this system, it should be able to predict that and actually suggest branches that are open, where you can add your own fields of great specificity. It will say, look, this branch is going to close shortly. The fields are filled, right? However, if you try this entry in field 5, you'll find that by the time you get to field 6, there are open entries there that you can fill in for your own particular focus of work. So I think we can get that level of intelligence into the system. And that shouldn't be too, I can't imagine it would be, it's easy for me to say.
I'm the guy who's having to create it. So.
From a mathematical viewpoint, you will get at the dead end sometimes. But from a more living viewpoint, you might be able to find ways, like Wikipedia did, in order to update and change and adapt to the whole thing.
I think there's an integrity point as well to do with, and I'm thinking particularly about the optional URL field. I mean, ultimately that is going to be one of the most useful fields because the data that you're looking for is already mostly indexed by URL. So I think one of the integrity issues you'll have to address, and this is a sort of boring phase 2, this is not fun phase 2 thing, this is a boring phase 2 thing, is operationally. A great way to kill trust in this will be if there's a high percentage of broken links. So for instance, I'm thinking of my own organisation, which unfortunately every so often just has a huge website upheaval and you can't find anything anymore. Yeah. It's incredibly frustrating for us. God knows what it's like trying to find stuff that we've written. If what you end up with is a load of broken links in here because we had one of our website upheavals, then people going are going to get more and more frustrated.
Well, but that's also addressed, I think, in our next stage when we're going to add. If you then add a document to the index, we're going to store it for.
But then it becomes, as Simon hinted, it becomes a matter of what degree of assurance you have in the authentication and the authorization of the people who are allowed to do that. Because on the one hand, you want it to be really quick and easy for people to fix broken links. On the other hand, that's an attack vector as well. The people who want to obscure stuff will go in and set it to a broken link. So there's, as you say, there's an integrity thing.
Okay, so let's just drill into that slightly because it's an important one. As Sander said, we've been thinking of this because technology failure and website failure and information failure is like huge, and over the lifetime of data is basically just constricted so much because of that. So I think the way we might be able to deal with this on a trust level is if you are, let's say, the Internet Society decides that it wants to publish, it's going to be responsible for indexing this stuff, and it wants to index core documents that are in the public domain, or maybe not even in the public domain. You as the publisher, as the Internet Society, publishing the index number, generating the index numbers, essentially that becomes your trust base, because you're the publisher, you've created the number. That then goes into the index. The data is automatically sucked up into our Wayback Machine. But the difference is, what this means is that although people would go to the Internet Society page via our search portal, if it's returning a 0 result, and our system would be able to pick up that it's a 0 result, a broken link, whatever, you'd probably, I would imagine, it's something like a notification page saying you're now being redirected to the central index. Now that means once you get your link restored, people will still be able to go to your site, but they're not getting a broken link. What they're getting is a notification, and they're getting directed to the data that you have authorized as the publisher.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the way we're going to get around this issue. Now, if you, as a member of the public, decide that you're going to try, not a member of the public, or authorized person, want to, let's say your thing is putting index numbers on. You want to go to the WikiLeaks page, so no one can actually use the WikiLeaks site, okay? I think even Assange knows this is a challenge. So you're a diligent member of the public, you want to create index numbers for WikiLeaks stuff. But you're not WikiLeaks, you're not the publisher, so your trust level is down here. You cannot authorize the WikiLeaks stuff to go into the central index, the Wayback Machine. Only, the WikiLeaks people can do that. So how we automate a trust verification to do that without massive manual intervention is also another challenge. But you can see where we're coming from here. We're trying to, the broken link thing is massive.
Yeah.
It also explains why the data disappears within an average of 3 years.
But as you said, you've got, Dewey did it by creating that community of librarians. Then you've got the next sort of concentric ring, which is the publishers and or authoritative sources, and then you've got the great unwashed, the users and consumers.
But one thing to note is that because I've been picking it up here that people mention the early days of Wikipedia, and of course the problem with Wikipedia back then was that everyone was just free to just register an account and start messing about with the system. In our case, it's only you have to log in before you can add something to the index, and we want to in the early phases at least control that carefully, I think.
Yeah, that is the difference. I'm not saying, we're still going to have all sorts of logistics issues here. So, yeah.
So, as a former librarian, basically, Robin was already hinting at this, is, basically no library ever ran on Dewey alone. Right, that is, so first of all, yes, the way you manage those numbers is it's done through a community. And also it was very important that we tried as much as possible never to have to write the same entry twice, right? That if somebody had already catalogued a certain thing, you would basically copy the catalogue entry, you wouldn't try to do it yourself again, right? But in addition to that, there's no library I can ever think, I think I've ever been in that didn't have several other access systems running alongside it, right? There will be a subject index. And basically these kind of things take care of what your question was. Is, as, for instance, what's particularly valuable about or useful about things is, or as language changes, if you run a subject index alongside, there's, and I see why in the machine age, I cannot see why you wouldn't have several access systems running alongside. Because when you come in and you say that, well, I do, the one thing I remember about this is it was about, this kind of this activist was involved. Why wouldn't you want to use the name of the activist, or I know it happened in this village, and so why wouldn't you you really want to be able to get access via any bit of information that helps you to nail down the relevance. And why in the machine age wouldn't you just run, pure machine power to also index, just for the linguistic use, to generate subject indexes automatically, plus allow people to basically create.
But there's nothing preventing people from running our system or plugging into our system alongside other things, and we can also add, of course, metadata fields to anything, and that's not locked down because it's using MongoDB, so it's not schemaless.
That's really important. The second thing is that I think in this day and age, when we're talking about sort of like everything being like 2.0 and people contributing is that the information about how documents are being used, and that actually powers to some extent the other search engines out there, right? It's about what people find useful and relevant, right? So if there's this brilliant Danish document that you're talking about, right? If it turns out there's that many people interested in it, then you would basically go like, okay, this is clearly important. Let's we should figure out how to get it translated. Either pay somebody to translate, or we crowdsource the translation of it. If you sort of you keep. I mean, that's probably like phase 3 or something like that.
I mean, this is still very early stages.
Basically, use looking at by looking at the usage and using the usage data, you could actually hugely improve this.
What you're raising is something the American Library Association is involved in this. They're inputting. They've got 2 people who essentially they're coordinate points for us. The first point they raised with us was the multiple index numbers and how that, if it's a coordinated multiple number, that can be very helpful. And the second is they talked about this question of collaboration and consensus. Now, you're right when you say that it's not just Dewey. Of course, it's not just Dewey. But if we can create a collaborative approach to this, then you build communities that have an input. The question is, how much do we automate that? I don't know. I'm suspicious of full automation because I've not seen semantic interrogation systems or analysis that's smart enough or accurate enough to get to where we want to be. So I think there has to be some level of manual intervention, particularly if we're crossing language barriers. And that, so not wanting to appear like we're anti-tech, we're not. Far from it.
It's a hard tech problem anyway. But anyway, the semantic thing that you raised, everyone is having trouble with this. Even Google and Translate, is often not accurate. And
sure. No, but that doesn't mean it's totally useless, right?
It's still useful and up to a limit.
You have to have a community of a particular domain, the more useful you make it. And certainly as a second, as an additional layer of information.
Certainly, but even Google Translate uses human intervention. If the translation is wrong, you can click on a button and improve it, and it goes into the system. That's exactly how we're going to.
Same thing. I would really the other thing is like, I don't know whether you thought about, but what would in order to basically make sure as you get to other phrases and you start adding things to it, to keep not lose the core vision, whether you've actually got like set up what usability people would advise you to do, to basically have personas for the user group, to have user journeys and use cases, to start with the basic one. You talked about the publisher one here,
that's one use case.
But as you talk to people, you'll find out there'll be other, but if you can add that to that, then if you look at functionality, personas always help to figure out how do you actually make this available in a way that the intended users can.
I think all of those elements, I think they're still stage 2, but sort of later stage 2. But if we've got the logic, if we say that what we've now got is a proposed logic to the system, it's kind of the roadway, this whole creation of trust networks, trust webs, trust input, that's huge. But at least we've got something to layer it through now. before you can start this thing by saying, well, if you were to build a system, what would be your trust matrix? How do you make this happen? How do you build community input and so on? Integration with different technologies. And then after that, you derive your logic. We just kind of decided we were going to reverse that. We would devise the road system first. And then we've got a fixed point in space and time that we can lock trust proposals into and trust ideas, because it's a physical, you can see it, it's real, and people can get a vision of how this might look, how it might end up. But it's chicken and the egg, but we figured this route was the best one to take.
Okay. You had a question as well?
I have a lot, but so okay. So I was thinking about how the catalog your own stuff would play out in practice, and this is not by any means a perfect analogy, but it's the one that came to my mind, right? So there are academic portals like Social Science Research Network where you catalog your own work, right? So you pick all the Journal of Economic Literature classifications that you think apply. And what happens is that people want their work to be found, so they pick every classification that could plausibly apply, and certainly everything at the higher levels of abstraction that could plausibly apply. And as a consequence, you can't find anything because everything has been cataloged under so many different numbers that no matter what search you put in, you come up with so many results, unless it's very weird, right? So there's, I've done a couple where you get 5 things, and they are none of them very useful anyway. So I am kind of, I suppose the term might be called moral hazard, if one were thinking in American law and economics jargon. I am wondering how you actually get to a situation in which everybody hasn't cataloged their own stuff under so many numbers that you actually get the precision that you're describing. And part of the answer to that resides in the fields that you didn't show us. So you went through, you did your example and you stopped after electronic communication surveillance. Yeah. And I did not see, so it would be nice to have you do that, right? Yeah. And then I have a related question about how you decided what the subcategories were. And maybe I'm not quite processing that, but there's a level for me on which the road system metaphor just fundamentally fails because intellectual work is not, and human rights advocacy is a form of highly creative intellectual work and highly creative political work, and in neither of those cases are you going to get where you want to go if you just stick to the roads, right? There's a sort of nonlinear creative synthesis that if you're any good doing research or advocacy, you have to follow, and I'm just not getting it yet, but it might be helpful if you did a couple examples where you actually dived into the things that you skipped over in the demo.
We could do that. Well, we can't do it with the opposite stance at the moment because we're only just finished it.
So you talked about the internet connection is gone.
See?
Yeah, there we go.
Well, that's maybe the question. Will it be available offline?
Well, no, actually, it's really important. We don't have internet now.
No, it's
well, okay, well, we
gone.
can talk this through. And actually, it's funny about the offline thing. It's very interesting. Actually, that's one thing we have yet to discuss. Is can this be an offline resource in some way? In the same way that can this also tag data which isn't online? Let's say book data or something. So basically, it's just making reference to abstract.
But what do you mean with offline then exactly? It's not on the public internet, but on a network somewhere, or on a computer?
It's like if you're so not the content that is linked to it, but the index. So basically that you get search result, and when you go online, you can then go to the links and get where you want to go.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see why not. I mean,
then you would
because in terms of size of the data, it shouldn't be too much.
Yeah. Well, you have to, compress it and then send it over. Maybe sync it to your local computer so that you have some application that you can search through it locally, and then when you go.
It's a design choice that we make at that stage.
Yeah.
We can do that.
I mean, but what we did now is just create a web-based application. But obviously, you can, make all kinds of applications based on the API, and that can have an offline sync feature or something that pulls the data in and allows you to search through it offline. And then, when you come back online, it syncs it back or something. So that could be built.
Could I just return to the question you raised there about you're talking about road design or a motorway design. This has actually been raised with us before. I don't think our intention is to stifle creativity by laying down frameworks and sort of...
No, you're not going to stifle people's creativity, but the question is whether actually people are going to be able to find that which would prove to be most useful to them.
Well, yeah, and I think there's got to be, this, to an extent it's a community decision on kind of where you draw that balance. I hate that word. But if we're, say, for example, look, some things are locked in, right? So your arterial roads are, if you like, your 8 specific branches of human rights. Fundamental freedoms is the one we saw there. But it could be economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, those are locked down in law, have been for 70 years. We'll keep some fields free in case, in 100 years' time, 50 years, new branches of human rights are created. But those are arterial roads, those are expressways that are locked down. It's equally true that if you go to fundamental freedoms, you've got 7 specific elements of fundamental freedoms, like right of freedom of association, for example, privacy. But again, we keep 2 or 3 of those free in case there are changes, shifts, whatever. Or we can add, we can amalgamate under different, 20 years, somebody the decision might be to amalgamate stuff so that you can add new fields, new additions to the same field. But so we can get this, I would say that those arterial roads, if you like, we take up to the 3rd content field, so this is actually the 4th numeric field. And after that, we can't go any further. That essentially is the framework. And the framework is largely according to practice and law. And we have, for example, the framework of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, because we know we have a legal framework that forms the foundation for these first 3 fields. After that, people have got to figure it out in whatever way we can kind of determine is the most sensible framework. That people have got to be able to build their own pathways through the system.
Can I give a hypothetical? I was trying to think of the weirdest thing I could think of, and I'm sure that people in the room can think of weirder things. And by weird,
With 5 minutes left.
Okay.
By weird, I just mean hard to classify within the conventional sort of universalizing Western human rights framework that you're working from. So the Lebanese hashtag use stink campaign. I may have the wrong country, but I think it's Lebanon. So suppose you're working with that. Just walk me through it. How do you? So this is the total breakdown of government as represented by the failure to come pick up the trash, right? People living in heaps of trash, and hashtag use stink being the campaign that is mobilized by Twitter to reinvigorate government that is responsive to the will of the people.
Okay, so this.
Just how would you put that?
Well, I mean, not that I'm familiar with that campaign specifically, but I would imagine, okay, so we're talking about public information, so it stays there at 1. Right, the big purple box there, you're going to be looking at economic, social, and cultural rights, aren't you? Predominantly. So you're going to click whatever we've got for economic, social, and cultural rights, so field 4, for example. Right? Now, under economic, social, and cultural rights, you're going to decide, you're going to look down the 8, 10 subdivisions, and you're going to say, this is about resistance to government policy on the abuse of pick whatever. And you're working your way through, because if this is a campaign, you're saying this, if this is a campaign, right, to reform government and to create awareness, you're going to go down a particular path. But all is driven through economic, social and cultural rights, and you'll make choices as you move along. And of course what we're saying is that you can find similar campaigns that are happening in other countries. People can start learning from each other. But you're right, now there is this thing, we can't tell people how to use the index. I mean, we can guide them, we can help them, but it might very well be that people go, it's not an economic, social and cultural right, it's a fundamental freedom that we're talking about. Now, okay, now we really get to the interesting stuff, because you're going down a completely different branch. Now, if we're clever enough for the system is going to, as you're moving through, the system's going to say, hey, didn't you mean economic, social and cultural rights? Because it's sure looking like you are. So the system starts to actually use its own, data.
Well, so what wasn't quite clear to me on that was, as you go further right down the taxonomy, are the choices that you're presented with conditional on?
Yes, they're conditional up to a point.
So the really tricky thing there is, as Simon said, so your lobbying example, if lobbying changes from a predominantly political or governance issue to a criminal law issue, then what might happen is that you go back and you revise the major division or the secondary division, you change that from a 1 to a 2, all of a sudden you've completely changed the semantics of every number further to the right. Because had you chosen option 2 to start with when classifying that, the subdivisions that you were presented with would have been a different set.
Except if you take a look at some of the, we haven't included them in this presentation, but it might be that if you want to change, if you like, the emphasis or the focus, you can maintain all of these, these 2, 2, 1, 2, 3 numbers, and you just simply change one of the more primary numbers, and that shifts the focus, but you can still keep. Because what you've got there is essentially an extremely long identification number. And you can still shift your early digits if you want to change the focus, and it will not affect the focus point created by those 12 digits.
Yeah. Eventually there is a stop to the...
Practical question before we get the next one.
Oh yeah.
What could you offer certain communities who have their own platforms themselves in order to help you further experiment, not developing, that's not what most communities do themselves, but with further experimenting and getting response to what is happening? Are these apps available that you are talking about? And is the system in some way running so that you can experiment with it?
The system is running, and there's the bell. Okay, so the system is already running. There are a few minor things that we need to sort out before we'll make it public and give people access, I guess.
Then we basically will be
we'll start with this. Yeah.
Anybody who wants to play with it, we'll work with them, collaborate with them on seeing how this can help their own systems and how they can help us too.